folks. Welcome to Science for this week. This week we're going to be learning about how to use a Punnett Square to predict the potential offspring for two parents. So before we get started, I have a couple notes for you about the science this week. A couple of tips for you to do better when you are doing the science. So the first thing that I wanted to highlight for you is I would love to see more faces at the live science that I'm offering every day at noon. The link is provided in your packet, and it's also available on the agenda each day. You can come, and if you want to work through an entire worksheet with me, happy to help you with that. If you would prefer to just ask a simple question, also happy to help. So I'd love to see more of your faces. Two more things. Last week's work, I made comments on, for those of you who had mistakes, so that you can correct and learn from your work. Please make sure that you're reading those and referring to them and fixing your mistakes. Otherwise, there's no way I can give you feedback because we're not in the classroom together. Last thing, third thing that I want to note is that I noticed that for some students, the notes that you wrote were only the things that I wrote on this piece of paper. Remember that, so this is a skill that I'm building with you so that you'll be ready for high school, but when you're taking notes, sometimes you need to listen to what the teacher's saying, not what the teacher's writing. So for example, last week, I defined heterogeneous or heterozygous and homozygous verbally. But some people wrote down the notes of just what I wrote on the paper, which is not the definition. So for this week's notes, a lot of this is going to be verbal. So I want you to practice listening and writing down what I'm saying. Pausing and rewinding the video and listening to something again can be really helpful in that. So let's review really briefly. So we're going to review using a Punnett Square. And remember that a Punnett Square helps us predict the offspring of two parents. It's basically, we're going to say this is what we know about the genotype of mom, the genotype of dad, and we're going to use it to tell what the offspring's genotypes might be. So the first thing that you need to know about a Punnett Square is a Punnett Square does not tell you what your offspring is going to have as their phenotype. So for example, no matter how many Punnett Squares I do, I can't know if my baby is going to have curly hair or straight hair, or allergies or no allergies. I can predict the chances of having those traits. And that is probability. So we're going to talk a lot about probability with our Punnett Squares. So let's get started. The trait that I want to use is allergies. So I thought about traits that we have, and I looked up. And from what I could find online, it sounds like cat allergies are a dominant trait. So having an allergy, which Mr. Kurnit is allergic to cats. So he has a cat allergy. That is the dominant trait. And it's probably more complex than this. We're going to treat it like it's completely dominant, meaning that the dominant trait will take over no matter how many alleles you have. So cat allergy, we're going to use capital A to represent it. No allergy is recessive, and we'll use a little a to represent that. So, Mr. Kurnit, he is really allergic to cats. So we're going to assume, we don't know this for certain without testing, but we're going to assume he is heterozygous for that trait. And Mrs. Kurnit, myself, I am not allergic to cats. I love cats. So that means I must be homozygous recessive. So his phenotype, remember when I'm asking for phenotype, I'm asking what the trait is. Mr. Kurnit is allergic. And because I'm the recessive, I have two copies of the recessive allele. I am not allergic. And I want to know the probability that baby Kurnit will be allergic. So my question is, what is the probability that baby Kurnit is going to be allergic to cats? So what we're going to do is we are going to draw our Punnett Square, and we're going to use my alleles and Mr. Kurnit's alleles, and we're going to figure out what are the possibilities for our baby. Is there even a chance that our baby could be allergic? Is there even a chance our baby could not be allergic? So I'm going to draw my Punnett Square. So I introduced this last week if you want to see another example. But we start a Punnett Square by drawing a square. And it doesn't matter which parent goes where. We can put Mr. Kurnit on top. Big A, little a, and then I am little a, little a. So we've put, this is one parent. So we put one parent on top and one parent on the side. So remember, this is because, the reason we have this is because our baby is going to get one copy of each allele, one copy of this allele from each parent. So from Mr. Kurnit, the baby could either get a capital A, the dominant allele, or a little a, the recessive allele. From me, the baby could only get a recessive allele, because that's all I have to offer in either case. So what the baby gets is random. This is just going to predict the chances. So we've got that written. So now let's do our predictions. So we treat this like a multiplication table. We look at the top, we look at the side, and we put them together. We always put the dominant allele first. So one possibility is that our baby can get a dominant allele from Mr. Kurnit and a recessive allele from me. See where those came from? In this box, we go up, we see that it can get recessive and recessive. In this box, dominant and recessive again. And then in this box, recessive, recessive. So these are, assuming that this trait is only controlled by one gene, and assuming that these are Mr. Kurnit's and my genotypes, this is the possible genotypes for our baby. So now we want to know what's the probability. And there's three ways we can represent probability. We can represent probability as a fraction, as percentages, or as a ratio. So if we look at these, now we have to think about, how do we know if this baby is allergic or not? Well, we know that any time that the baby has at least one copy of the dominant allele, the baby is going to have an allergy. So we see that in 1, 2 of the boxes, the baby has one copy of the dominant allele. So we can actually turn this into a chart if we want to. Let's make a chart. I like charts. We can put the phenotype up here. So we're going to say allergic and not allergic. So here, let's switch colors again. I like colors. So if we look at the fraction, the probability fraction of our baby being allergic, it is 2/4, or you could simplify that to 1/2, that the baby could be allergic. And it is, well, I see these two. In both these cases, the baby has 2 copies of the recessive allele, meaning they're not allergic to cats. So there's a 2/4 probability, a 1/2 probability, that the baby could be not allergic. If we want to look at percentages, well, the percentages are out of 100. There are 4 squares. Each square is how much percent? Think about it. So each of these squares is going to be 25%, because it's a quarter of a whole. So if we have 2 squares where the baby is allergic, our baby has 25% plus 25% is 50%. Our baby has a 50% chance of being allergic and a 50% chance of not being allergic. If I want to represent this as a ratio, I could say that, well, of the 4 possible offspring we could create, 2 out of 4 of them, 1, 2, are allergic, and 2 out of 4 are not allergic. Now, on the worksheets, when I ask you, if I don't specify, if I ask you for probability, then you are allowed to use whichever of these forms you'd like. You may represent as a fraction, as a percent, or as a ratio. Just make sure that you know how to do all 3, because you might encounter them as questions on our exit ticket, which will be next week. So this is how you calculate the potential babies that someone could make. Now, note that, first of all, this doesn't mean that we're having 4 babies. That's terrifying. So we're having 1 baby. Our baby could be any of these 4 genotypes. These are the chances that our baby, because our baby's genes were selected randomly, which allele it got from dad was randomly selected, and I'll actually show you that in a minute. But it's a random chance, so this is probability. It's the chances that our baby is going to be allergic. So basically, we have a 50-50 chance of my kid not being able to go over someone's house because they have a cat. It's the 50-50 chance. We'll see. And this will change. Think about how this would change if it turned out Mr. Kurnit had 2 copies of the dominant allele. Think about how our Punnett Square would be different. That would lead to different chances of our child having a cat allergy. We're just going to have to wait and find out. So, the one last thing I wanted to show you. So at this point, if you need to stop the video, if you're feeling overwhelmed, good. I did want to show you, though, why each parent contributes 1 copy of the allele. So this is sort of like the extra, like how last week I showed you the Punnett Squares. So, note my desk. I wanted to show you some cells. I made some cells. So, here's our cell. You can see in blue, you got the cell membrane. Red is our nucleus. Now, in this nucleus, this cell, every somatic cell in your body, has 2 copies of each chromosome. And on this chromosome, you'll have a gene. So, for example, somewhere on this chromosome, you might have the gene for cat allergies. Now, in each of the cells, in my body and in your body and in everybody's body, you have a pair of copies of that chromosome. But how do you end up with only 1 of these in the gamete? Well, the way that works is that to make a gamete, you actually have to undergo cell division. So I can't do this with paper, but basically this cell is going to divide and separate into 2 cells. When it does, basically what's going to happen is one of those chromosomes goes, and ready for this? One of those chromosomes goes into each cell. So now I have 2 cells. Now, this is called meiosis, M-E-I-O-S-I-S, and this is the way simplified version. I am skipping like 4 steps of this process. I'm showing you only the relevant process. So just know that I am way oversimplifying. You will learn more about this in high school biology. But when the sex cells divide, they take 1 copy of each chromosome with you. So these would be like 2 eggs in a female's body. And each of those eggs has 1 copy of each of these genes. And so when you are making offspring, which of these eggs gets used is random. So let's say this one gets used. Well, the same process happens in the male, or whatever the counterpart is. So in this cell, all the male's body cells have a cell with 2 copies of the gene. So 2 copies of each chromosome, 1 from the mom, 1 from this cell's mom, 1 from this cell's dad. So this cell also, just like in female cells, the male cells undergo cell division, meiosis, and they produce their cells. Their cells are little sperm cells. So which of these cells ends up fertilizing the egg? Also random. This is why you randomly get 1 copy. So if this cell were to be the cell that ended up fertilizing the egg, you would have another copy of the red chromosome. If it was this cell that worked, you would have another copy of the green chromosome. So let's say that it ends up being this cell. What happens when fertilization happens is the sperm cell actually becomes a part of this cell. It like basically gets sucked into the egg cell. And both of those chromosomes end up in the cell. So whereas the parents both started out heterozygous, having 1 copy of red, 1 copy of green, this baby is now homozygous, dominant, or recessive, whichever one we said this was. That is why you have 1 copy from each parent, because you have 1 copy, 1 randomly chosen copy of the chromosome in your female cell and 1 in your male cell. And when they come together, those chromosomes come together. And so in the rest of the baby's body, as these cells divide, every time you divide to make a regular body cell as opposed to a sex cell, a gamete, you divide and you always make copies of these. So you'd make 2 more copies so that the next cell would also have 2 copies. And when this divides, it would make 2 copies in the next cell. So these cells would all have both copies of this. Okay? So that's why you only get one copy of each allele from your parent. That's just a fun little tidbit. If you want to learn more, this concept, I will write the name of it, is called meiosis. If you happen to be curious, there's some great animations on YouTube about how this is the division. It's cell division to make gametes. Totally optional, not a standard that we're doing, but I thought it might be interesting for some of you to know. Please reach out to me, email me if you have questions. Please plan to come to my Science Live every day at noon. And don't forget that I'm also doing a special, if you happen to see this before 12:30 on Tuesday, I'm doing a lunch bunch just to check in and say hi to people and share some videos I have from my last ultrasound of the baby. You can see his heart beating actually, which is pretty cool. Okay, email me with questions. Make sure that you do the notes and 2 other practices this week. 2 practices of your choice. So I'm going to be checking 3 things total. All right, take care. I miss you all.